Welcome to The Psychic and the Doc. I'm your host, Mark Anthony. My amazing co-host, Dr. Pat Basili, will be back next week. And this is a very special episode because yesterday, April 7th, was World Health Day. And back in 1948, during the formation of the World Health Organization, it was decided that global awareness for health was very important. And that's why the World Health Organization designated April 7th as World Health Day. And these days, it's really hard to talk about health without mentioning needles. I mean, let's face it, everybody is in a debate whether or not they should get vaccinated for COVID-19, and needles are a big discussion. But there's more to the healing power of needles than just vaccinations. And that brings me to my guest and my friend, Jamin Nichols. Jamin is a world-renowned acupuncture physician. And for over 20 years, he's practiced acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine. Jamin's life work began with the study of the Shen Hammer contemporary Chinese pulse diagnosis. Say that 6 times real fast. But this particular technique in Oriental medicine was brought into the 21st century by his longtime mentor, colleague, and friend, Dr. Leon Hammer. And Jamin travels the world teaching the Shen Hammer pulse system in Europe, China, and of course here in the US. Currently, he is working with Dr. Hammer on the 3rd edition of Chinese Pulse Diagnosis, a Contemporary Approach. Welcome to The Psychic and the Doc, Jamin Nichols.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. What a great introduction. I feel honored and privileged to be able to represent the World Health Day discussion here. So I'm looking forward to this. Thank you.
Well, it's very important because World Health Day, and it'd be easy for us just to talk about conventional medicine. And I know a lot of people, are wondering, about the COVID and let's face it, that's affected everybody. But World Health Day, why not bring in the healing techniques from all over the world? And certainly I can't think of too many people that can discuss it to the extent that you can, Jamin. So I appreciate you being here. Acupuncture, it's a very ancient healing art. What can you tell us, Jamin, about its origins?
It's ancient to the point where It goes back thousands of years, so we can only be so certain as far as its exact origins per se, but there's written texts that are most known through China that easily go back over 2,000 years at this point. And so I think even you may have seen there's been a story of this old tattooed ice age kind of guy found in with these like sort of tattoos with acupuncture channels kind of going along that were put onto his body in some fashion. So it would really imply that there's been some aspects of acupuncture going on for, I would guess, over 5,000, if not more years.
Wow. So this is, and this obviously is coming from China. So at the time that the pyramids were under construction, people in China were figuring out acupuncture. Is that what you're telling us?
That would be my suspicion. Yeah, right now it's hard to say for sure because I'm not back there. But
We don't have our Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure time machine to take us back to the origins of acupuncture. And this show also, for the benefit of the listeners, for people who have questions about the art of acupuncture and about alternative and herbal medicine, please call in at 1-800-930-2819 so you can talk to Jamin Nichols, who's a world renowned certified acupuncture physician. So, Jamin, there's a lot of people are not very well versed in what acupuncture is, and it's kind of lumped in the category of being alternative medicine. I think most people in the West, and particularly in the United States, are familiar with what's known as allopathic medicine. So, can you tell us what is allopathic medicine?
well, I mean, allopathic medicine, I guess it's a fancy way of describing what's mostly thought of as like Western medicine or biomedicine, what most people are acclimated to or accustomed to when they go to see their general practitioner or specialist of some sort. That's the general type of medicine that will be utilized in that situation.
And so, what would you say is the difference, or the differences between allopathic medicine or the allopathic approach versus acupuncture?
Well, I think one thing that stands out to me is that when you're considering allopathic medicine, generally speaking, it focuses predominantly on trying to deal with the symptoms that people are dealing with, or maybe they're diagnosed as being like high blood pressure or diabetes or something. And it seems to me that its approach seems to be more in a kind of linear sort of manner where you have this specific cause and this effect and it kind of goes into this direction. The same kind of approach with a lot of the medications that get used, and where with acupuncture, Chinese medicine, Oriental medicine, when it's used at its full potential, it's much more circular. And what I mean by that is you're taking into account all the variables, not trying to limit it to just a single variable. Because in reality, we don't really live in a bubble. And so to try to take a medical approach that's really just looking at this single variable, that's not realistic to our everyday life. It doesn't really take into account our diet, our lifestyle, the weather around us. There's just so many factors that come into play, and so for me, it's that circular part of the medicine that compared to that more kind of linear approach that stands out as a big difference between the two.
That's a really good point. It seems to me that allopathic medicine, Western medicine, it's here's a problem, let's treat the symptoms. In many instances, let's get to the cause. But it seems like a big part of Western medication is putting a band aid on symptoms as opposed to getting to the root of the problem. Do you agree with that, or is that an inaccurate assessment?
I do. It reminds me of a line from a song I remember. If you can heal the symptoms and not affect the cause, it's quite a bit like trying to heal a gunshot wound with gauze.
Okay, that's definitely a way. But on the flip
Oh,
side of the, okay, go ahead. On the flip side of the karmic coin, allopathic medicine has traditionally looked at things like acupuncture as sort of fringe or alternative medicine. I know for a long time, allopathic medicine or the medical profession in general looked at chiropractic treatments as like one click away from voodoo. And I think to a very, very large extent that has changed. Do you see acupuncture as being accepted more by Western medicine, or is it still, do you think, kind of on the fringe?
yes. Oh, Um, so I have a unique experience in a certain respect. For a while, I taught at an acupuncture college for about 14 years or so. During the time there, one of the things that was kind of interesting to me is initially a lot of the people, like when I was in school, a lot of the people in the class could have been my parents or grandparents. And actually, literally, my stepfather at the time was actually one of the people in the class with me. So whereas I kind of continued into the teaching side of things and seeing a lot of the newer people coming through the program, I started seeing a larger percentage of a younger population going into it as their first profession, such as myself. And where in the initial part, it was a lot more maybe people going kind of tired of what they were doing and trying something different, or maybe they were previously in physical therapy, massage, and they wanted to kind of expand their medicine approach in a way. But so that to me tells me that it is starting to be accepted on a more larger scale. But there's also, from when I was talking about the differences, and there's one of my personal concerns, and this actually I say personal, it stems from my teacher's concern, Dr. Hammer, has to do with if this profession is not careful in the West, it'll kind of get swallowed up by the more allopathic approach and be put in a place where it's focusing more on the symptoms and not the individual, the person that's in front of you right there and then.
So it seems like right now it's a compartmentalized discipline as being a cross-disciplinary approach in that. We're coming up on a break in just about a minute and a half. And for anyone who wants to call in and ask Jamin Nichols about acupuncture or alternative health, or share your why I'm afraid of needles story, because a lot of people are, okay. The call-in number is 1-800-930-2819. So call in and share your why am I afraid of needles story. And let's hear what somebody who works extensively with needles in acupuncture and why you shouldn't be afraid of needles. So we're going to be coming back in just a little bit after a break. Call in 1-800-930-2819. Jamin, how can people find out? How can people contact you? What's the website to contact?
Well, I work in a family business. My mom, my sister, my brother, we're all over there. It's called Aquarian Dreams. And so if you go to aquariandreams.com, you can certainly find us there.
Super. I'm Mark Anthony. I'm known as the Psychic Lawyer. You're listening to The Psychic and the Doc. We'll be back after a break. And if you want to get hold of us and to share your I'm Afraid of Needles story, we are all ears. 1-800-930-2819. All right. We'll be back in just a minute. We are back. I'm Mark Anthony. You're listening to The Psychic and the Doc. My host, Dr. Pat Basili, will be back next week. And we are talking to Jamin Nichols, a world-renowned acupuncture physician and specialist in Chinese herbal medicine. So before we get into how acupuncture works, Jamin, how did you get interested in doing this?
It's a good question, Mark. So I mean, I grew up in the same area you live in here, and I enjoyed surfing. I was always good at school, but I can't say I was particularly motivated or had a strong direction in life, if you will. And my mom's father, my late grandfather, I think he very very intelligent man and wonderful man, and I think one of the things that I think he wished he maybe have done in his life was to study medicine. And he graciously offered to pay my way through medical school. But I didn't really have an interest in the traditional medical school route that at least from the allopathic medical school route. That just wasn't really the way that I was raised or brought up, and it didn't particularly. I wasn't gravitating towards that at all. And when we were kids, my mom used to take us to see a chiropractor, and I kind of enjoyed that. And I especially liked how he took some long lunch breaks so he could go surfing. So I ended up starting going to University of Central Florida in Orlando in a pre-med kind of track, thinking I might get into chiropractic. I did that for about a year, and something just told me, no, this is not my life's path. I have nothing against it. It just didn't. When that something you feel something inside of you, it's just
Yes.
not quite right. Well, that's where I felt, and so I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. So I changed my major to business, figuring, you can always fall back on business.
Right. I mean,
uh,
yeah, it never hurts to know about business.
So to draw out the story a little bit more here, so my entire family at the time was getting ready to relocate. I was living in Orlando going to school, and they were getting to relocate up to Gainesville, Florida. And I was not a big fan of Orlando, and thought maybe I would transfer to the University of Florida up there. And one thing led to another where that just wasn't quite in the cards, and the idea of acupuncture got brought up to me, and I started reading about it, and I really was pretty fascinated. And there were two schools in Gainesville at the time, and I checked them both out, and one I definitely resonated with more than the other, and so the next thing you know, I'm starting acupuncture school. Uh,
Awesome. So the question a lot of people, uh, people all know acupuncture involves sticking people with needles. All right. And before we get into your technique, how does acupuncture work? What's the theory or what's the scientific basis? How does putting needles in various spots in someone's body, how does that help?
Well, the spots that we're talking about, the acupuncture points, the majority of them lie along these channels, these pathways where the chi, the energy flows in a particular direction and order. And so the idea behind acupuncture is when there's some sort of disharmony within the body, within the person, there becomes either blockages or deficiencies within along these points. And so through the different diagnostic techniques, and even from palpation, from doing a lot of asking, looking at tongues, etc., you can get an idea of where these disharmonies lie and how you might be able to correct them through improving this normal circuit of chi flow, of energy flow through the body. So really, I don't really think of it as like the needles themselves are fixing the person. They're not like magic needles or anything, but they're harmonizing the person's chi in a way that they heal better themselves.
Do you think that chi, when you say energy, do you think that, or let me ask you this, the points, do they tend to be along neural pathways? In other words, along nerves, or is that not necessarily the case?
That's not necessarily the case. On occasion, there is a nerve that may get stimulated with an acupuncture point. Some points are a little bit closer than others, and it may have a little bit of a stronger reaction. But for the most part, acupuncture should be fairly painless. You might feel a little prick as it goes in, and then the sensation is as you get the chi actually coming to the point, sometimes you feel like a mild, almost like a buzzing kind of quality to it that I personally find to be fairly pleasant. Sometimes you'll feel a mild ache or maybe a little bit of pressure at the point. Sometimes it'll kind of radiate up or down the channel. Or let's say I put a point here and you feel it on the opposite side kind of thing. There's a lot of potential different sensations, but generally speaking, it's not that painful.
So is there a difference between acupuncture and acupressure?
Well, just the name kind of explains that.
Well, I kind of figured it did, but okay. So, what is the difference between acupuncture and acupressure?
Well, as the puncture part would imply, you're actually getting more directly into the channel flow with the needle actually going to the appropriate depth to either stimulate the chi or disperse the stagnation in that manner. With the acupressure, and I was kind of pointing to a spot here, this is a fairly common spot, for example, if people are having headaches. So you could potentially, let me see if I can get the So if you kind of follow the forefinger along here and you kind of
Right.
trace along the forefinger till there's a little depression, and usually it's fairly sore when you press on it. For people who are having headaches, they may actually get a little bit of a relief if they just kind of mash on that. They should expect it to feel a little tender, and that's usually a good sign they're on the right spot, especially for headaches more in the kind of frontal region, like if you're having kind of sinus headaches in that manner.
Wow, that's really interesting. So, what type of conditions do you treat? So, like, let's say a patient wants to come to you. What type of conditions do you treat with your approach to acupuncture?
Really, the way that I think about it is I'm treating the person. And so I've seen people for all kinds of different things, from serious kind of critical conditions to somebody just wants to feel more balanced. A lot of things, a lot of times when people come for acupuncture for the first time, it's pain often is what kind of brings them in there. Maybe they're having back pain, neck pain, etc., or sometimes they're trying to even like avoid surgery or something like that. So they're like, oh, I tried all these other things, and let me see what I can do with this here if this helps me.
Well,
Um,
I kind of figured it was pain. I mean, I don't think there's many people wake up on one morning and go, I really feel like getting stuck with a bunch of needles. You know what I'm saying? And I don't mean to be facetious, because I've gone to acupuncture, and I remember the first time I went, I was looking at, the doctor brought out all the needles and they're gold. And I'm like, uh-oh, do I really want to do this? And, once he started putting them in me, and I've actually, I've had Jamin treat me. And so James putting the needles in, and the next thing I know is I'm waking up 45 minutes later, feeling a lot better than I did. I mean, it's amazing, you don't even really feel it. And it's funny because I see people, like I went for a COVID shot recently, and everyone's lined up, and there's people that are just going through a whole, oh my God, I'm gonna get stuck with a needle. And it's like, good Lord, it's like, just deal with it. But acupuncture is a completely different ball game than that.
it may be worth noticing a lot of times people's experience with needles is going and getting a shot, whether for a vaccine or for whatever else, or they're getting blood drawn for having tests done. And
Yeah.
the kind of needles that are used in that are the gauge of the needle is a lot thicker, and they're a hypodermic needle. So they have this sharp, jagged edge with a hole in the middle meant to either draw something out or to push something in. Where the acupuncture needles, they're about the width of your hair. They're very, very tiny little things they don't really compare at all to the kind of needle that you're probably
Big
accustomed to
syringe.
thinking about.
Yeah, I know. It's like, you go, it's like something like this, like, yeah, but you work in a particular area of acupuncture, and that's what you refer to, or what is referred to as the Shen Hammer Contemporary Chinese Pulse. Okay, now that's a mouthful. You got to tell us, what is the Shen Hammer Contemporary Chinese Pulse diagnosis
Well,
method?
this is how I first started studying with my teacher, Dr. Hammer. He's 96 years old now. But
Wow.
I actually had already, I should actually preface, even though I started acupuncture school before I started studying this particular system and met my teacher, but I think that my teacher in this method really kind of sort of created my purpose, and I think in a lot of ways, if you will. So when I'm talking about pulse diagnosis in this context, we're talking about generally we feel on the radial artery near the wrist, and we're checking to, there's different positions. So I'm checking here, here, here on both wrists, and there's different positions. We roll in, roll this way, so on. And most people, when they think of pulse, they're thinking, okay, what's the rate? What's the rhythm? And maybe they go even a little further and think, is there stability to the pulse, or is it changing, kind of thing? And certainly that's part of what we're checking, and that's very important. But we're also checking for the depth of how hard do we have to push to feel? How wide does it feel? What is the shape of it? Does it have a smooth fluid quality to it, or does it have like a rough edged, like jagged kind of quality to it? And is there force? Like sometimes when I first see people, for example, I tell them to not have coffee that day or caffeine, because the caffeine causes the force of the pulse to be much stronger and can mask some of the more subtle findings. But all of these things, they give you a huge amount of diagnostic information from qi deficiency, blood deficiency, yin yang deficiency, excess fluids, phlegm, stasis of qi, stasis of, and when you look at all the different positions or organs that we're feeling, it specifically gives it to those areas. And a lot of times with the pulse, I think it's a large part of what allows Chinese medicine to be used as a preventative medicine. You can sometimes pick things up years or even decades on the pulse before they actually start manifesting into a physical kind of manner. And so I might feel something that makes me, for example, let's say I'm feeling a choppy quality in the position that relates to the heart. Choppy would generally imply a degree of blood stagnation, and that I'll rate qualities on a 1 to 5 scale. So if that's at a high degree, that's telling me this person has some blood stagnation, probably in the coronary arteries, and so that's putting them more at like a risk of a heart attack, for example.
Wow.
And so,
so sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but
yeah,
it
go
seems
ahead.
like the focus in the Oriental, the Chinese medicine, is the focus is preventative, as it's proactive as opposed to reactive. That's what this is sounding like.
That's how I like to approach it. That doesn't mean people that doesn't mean people don't come in to see me with specific current issues going on. And of course you have to try to address these issues, but I try to think of things. I look at, and this again comes from my teacher's approach, Dr. Hammer. I try to break things down. What are the most immediate concerns? What are some of the root issues? And then what are some of the more secondary and kind of derivative issues? And so you kind of have to think of it in these different layers in order to try to get to the cause of the problem.
Right. I got a question. I know that in the materials, it says Oriental medicine. Is that the correct term for it, or are they going more towards Asian medicine now? Because I want to make sure, we're not offending anybody. Because I remember, like, the acupuncture physician I went to, his degree was in Oriental medicine. And the Orient is East Asia, or is there a preference in the field of acupuncture?
So more recently, it's actually become a little bit of a kind of political issue within the medicine, in a way where sometimes in the wrong context, I think Oriental can be considered a derogatory term. Um, if you say like an Oriental rug, it's not considered derogatory or anything. But I think if you refer to a specific person in that manner, it's possible they may take it in that kind of way. So right now, it's funny you bring that up, because there's a lot of schools and even a lot of the professional organizations, like you have the National Certification for Commission for Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine. You have the Accreditation Commission for Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine, the The school that I taught at for so many years is Dragon Rise's College of Oriental Medicine. And so now there's this thing coming up. Are people going to have to change the names or not? And so there is a little bit of a political issue going on from that end. I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out.
Okay, so we'll just refer to it as acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine. How's that?
So sometimes, I mean, even though I have studied Japanese style of the medicine as
Now
well, and so
that's
that's where the tricky part comes in, because there's like a Korean approach, or there's different approaches that do come from, we'll say, East Asia, and so there is that difficulty in trying to think about it.
well, I'm glad that you brought that up because I know that you are well versed, very skilled in, I believe it's called Toyo Hari. That is
Toyohari, yeah.
Toyohari technique of acupuncture. Now, what is that, and how is it different than Chinese acupuncture?
It's a style of Japanese meridian therapy. It's similar. Some of its theories, as far as point selection, to a certain extent, relate to kind of similar to a five element style of acupuncture. It's to use puncture, I would use that almost loosely, because the way that I was trained is more of a non-insertion technique. And it's different than acupressure, where you're not necessarily pressing on the points, but you are using either a special kind of needle you're not actually inserting, you're just bringing it close to or maybe just touching the skin, or a tool that I'll sometimes use called a teishin. It looks sort of like a big sewing needle, but without a little eye in it. And in those situations, I usually use the dull end of the teishin. And so the idea is there's like a certain technique you kind of palpate along, you feel the point. And when you feel the point, if this is my teishin, you kind of like go right to the point. You sort of wait for you can kind of start to feel the chi arrive after doing this. When the chi arrives at that point, you pull it away if you're tonifying kind of quickly. And but these, and that's not all of Japanese acupuncture. The Toyohari was developed actually there. If you're blind in Japan, there's only a few professions you're allowed to go into, and acupuncture is actually one of them. So you can imagine, if you have no sight, your sensitivity to touch and energy is likely going to be significantly enhanced. And so through just kind of trial, practice, and so on, they were finding that they could actually have a significant effect on the acupuncture points without actually inserting the needle.
Wow, that's really interesting. And when you're talking about chi, I want to revisit chi. And chi
Okay.
is energy. Now, as a medium, I'm all about energy because that's what I'm doing when I'm communicating with a spirit. Is spirit is pure energy, and he, she, or they as a collective are emitting waves of frequency into my brain. Okay, so that's the type of energy that I'm dealing with. But the energy that you're talking about is the internal energy field of a person. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, when you get into the theory of Chinese medicine, it's like you have heaven, earth, and man, and so the energy that's within in man is ultimately coming from heaven and earth, and so there's energies of the cosmos that come in as we. So it's not purely just inside us when we're talking about chi, but that's obviously from my way of how I'm working. That's the part that I'm working with.
Now, when you said you feel the chi coming up, this sounds like a psychic ability that you got going on there, Jamin. Because if you're able to feel or sense someone's energy, because people are always asking me, well, how can I become psychic? It's like, well, everybody to varying degrees has some form of you can call it psychic ability or sensitive ability. But I want you to explain, what do you mean by I'm feeling their chi coming up, and that's when we like take the needle or whatever it is, the pressure away? How does that work? Explain how that works for you.
So sometimes it's different for me at different times. Sometimes it's more intuition. Sometimes it's more of there's just this like buzzing quality that I start to kind of feel rise up my arm when I'm doing it. And it's sometimes it's watching, it's observing the patient. You see something kind of shift in the patient. Maybe all of a sudden they take this really deep breath, or you see their whole features just kind of soften. There's a lot of little subtleties that I think you'll pick up on as you kind of follow that along. Um, so I don't know if there's any single way, but it took me a long time to feel comfortable in trusting that, if you will. And
No, that's a
actually,
biggie. Yeah.
um,
Anytime you're dealing with energy, I'm glad you brought that up. It took so the mark of a professional in your realm is when to trust what you're feeling.
well, let me tell you, that is one of the things that I love about pulse diagnosis. And this is actually, I got this concept a little bit more from the Toya Hari approach, not necessarily from the Shen Hammer approach, but I feel like I can sort of overlap things into mesh it into my own personal style. And so after I do a point, whether it's actually with a needle or with more of the Toya Hari technique, I can go back to the pulse and monitor this. It's my feedback loop. Did the change occur, or did it get better? Did it get worse, or did nothing change? And if it got better, that's a good confirmation that things went as I was hoping they did. And if it did not, then I might need to maybe check for a different point, or do the technique again.
Oh, fascinating. Um, in your diagnostics, I think you mentioned earlier something about the tongue. Do you okay? I know that I know that Korean medicine, they're very interested in what color is your tongue. Does that tie into anything that you do?
Yeah, tongue diagnosis is also a very important part.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us
The
about that.
so um, there's different areas of the tongue, first off, that relate to different kind of areas of the body. So for example, the very tip of the tongue pertains to the heart in most systems of Chinese medicine. And so let's say, for example, you look at the tongue and you see the tip of the tongue has a much more of a kind of scarlet red color. Maybe there's a little red petechiae, little red bumps on the tip as well. That's going to tell me there's some heat in the heart. And the likelihood is, if that was manifesting with symptoms in a way, somebody may be having trouble sleeping. They might tend to be kind of anxiety sort of symptoms, kind of worry, overthinking kind of stuff.
I'm Mark Anthony. You're listening to The Psychic and the Doc on Transformation Talk Radio. My amazing co-host, Dr. Pat Basili, will be back next week. We're talking to Jamin Nichols, a acupuncture physician and a specialist in Chinese herbal medicine. And Jamin, before the break, you were telling us about tongue diagnosis and how it's not just the color of the tongue, but the coatings on it and other features, the spots and things. So please continue. What like, all right, let's say somebody came in and they, you say you want to look at their tongue. What would be like a real warning sign, a real red flag? What is it that you would see?
A real warning sign. If you happen to see like a coat that was more of a blackish kind of coat, for example, that could be something concerning. The other day, actually, I saw someone, it was a new patient, and just behind the tip of their tongue, which relates to the lungs, had this, it was like a notable loss of color. So you saw like the color of the rest of the body, but when you look there, it had this, the loss of color is really the best description. It wasn't like it was white per se. It just like it didn't have color there. And that to me is a sign that their lungs could be compromised to the point where it may lend it go down into the direction it could be a concern for cancer or more serious kind of lung issues. Um, I mentioned to this person that has a potential concern there, and they mentioned to me that their long history of smoking and some other kind of lung kind of reasons to be concerned, if you will. But I actually have a really cool tongue story.
Yeah,
Relate.
go.
So when I first started studying with my teacher, Dr. Hammer, was back in like 98, 99, and I was going to school in Gainesville, Florida, but he was doing a course in Berkeley, California, which coincidentally is where my mom and dad met. And so I once a month I would go out there for a long weekend, and I had a friend who lived in Berkeley, and I was staying there, and I would take the bus to get over to where the class was at. And one day on the bus, you know how sometimes there's buses where there's seats where there's rows where you're like kind of just one after the other, but sometimes there's seats where the seats are back against the side of the bus. And so
Right.
I'm sitting in one of these seats, and there's this lady across the way sitting there, and I'm not gonna. She appeared to be homeless. I can't say for sure, but that was the appearance that she gave. And she was, I'm just watching her, just kind of curious, and she's having this like conversation with the invisible person next to her, like just answering questions, asking like total conversation, like back and forth kind of thing. And this was before the cell phones and all the little earbuds, and so I know that wasn't part of it. As I got off the bus, I actually got a glimpse of her tongue. Her mouth was open, and the tip of her tongue was so scarlet red with those little red prickles, the petechiae, but the coating itself over the whole tongue was this like thick, like sticky, slimy yellow kind of coat. And as I was walking by there, there's like big light bulb went off on the top of my head kind of thing. And I was like, that's what they mean by phlegm fire harassing the heart. And this is a Zhang Fu pattern in Chinese
Oh.
medicine. So you have that thick, sticky yellow coating indicating the phlegm side of things. You have the fire with that scarlet red tongue, the with all the red little prickles there. And that's the kind of pattern that you would likely see it, for example, in somebody who was schizophrenic, who she appeared to be. I'm not going to say for certain, but every indication was that she was probably a homeless person who had schizophrenia.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with you as a physician making an observation because, you weren't jumping to a judgment, but this is the data that you had available. And I think it's important what you're talking about because, we our body is one. The body and mind, the body is one. And people say, well, how can you tell what's going on from your heart by looking at your tongue? That's because they're all part of the same organism, and people think that when you have problems with your liver, it shows in your skin. I mean, when I was practicing law and people would walk to my office and they had a sallow, yellowed look,
Oh, jaundice,
99
absolutely.
point times out of 100, they had a severe addiction problem, and the liver being the filter for your bloodstream. And when the liver begins to get diseased, it manifests in the skin. So, taking that same logic, if there's something wrong with your heart, why wouldn't it show in your tongue? So that makes a lot of sense.
And yeah, and you made a good point as well too, that we're talking about the entire organism. So when I mentioned the heart, the liver, the lungs, it's much more than the physical organ I'm talking about. It's its entire contribution to the entire the person. And so you have a lot of factors that I'm going to take a little tangent here, if it's okay. So one of the things that concerns me with sort of the state of our healthcare system right now is the high degree of specialization. You've got your right eye doctor, your left ear doctor, your heart doctor, your liver doctor, and you theoretically have a GP who's kind of overseeing the whole process. But the reality is for most people, there is real no oversight as far as what everybody else is doing. And so everybody, all your different doctors are just looking at little parts of you, and they don't really see you as a whole.
The whole, yeah. Yeah. I saw that when I was in Japan. It appears that healthcare in Japan is a cross disciplinary approach. So if you need to go to a neurologist, Okay, yeah, that's fine, but it's also in conjunction with dietary changes, with acupuncture, whereas here, like you said, they're only dealing with one little part of your body. If you're having a problem with your heart, they're just focusing on that. I mean, because I've heard a lot of doctors say that, oh, well, what you eat doesn't matter. You can eat whatever you want. They told that to a friend of mine who had stomach cancer. You can eat whatever you want. And this is a guy that would eat bacon for breakfast, hamburgers for lunch, and a steak for dinner. And I'm like losing my mind. And they're like, well, what do you know? It's like, I don't know, psychic medium, medical, intuitive, and his doctor was basically saying you can eat meat, fatty red meats 3 times a day, and go figure, this guy had stomach cancer. I've always been of the mindset that garbage in, garbage out. If you're feeding yourself, sugar, red fatty meats, alcohol, all those things. And unfortunately, a lot of them taste good. The problem is, though, you're adding toxicity to your body, and illness and dis-ease feeds off of that. Is that what you think?
That sums up my opinions fairly well from that regard. I think there's actually, I heard somebody say it kind of one time. It's not we are what we eat, it's we are what we don't excrete.
Wow, that's a good one. It's not what we eat, it's what we don't excrete.
But it's the idea to think that our diet does not play a role in our health, to me just seems ludicrous. I mean, um, heal thyself. I mean, the what we put into our body is so much of how we feel, the energy we have. And unfortunately, there's no one diet that's right for everybody. It depends on, sometimes it depends on your ancestry. Sometimes it depends on the climate that you're in. Sometimes it depends on what's local and in season. It may depend on the health of your gut. If you have a really weak digestive system, for example, you're not going to be able to digest things that maybe are a lot colder or a lot richer in nature, for example.
Right.
Um, that's significant too, though. Sometimes people want to eat healthy, and so they eat a lot of salads. But if they have a very weak spleen chi, they may actually be making it weaker by eating a lot of raw foods in that situation. So everybody's different, and we might be thinking we're doing something healthy, but it's not always the case.
So if people want to find out more about Jamin and the work he does, visit the website aquariandreams.com. That's the facility that he works out of, aquariandreams.com. And if people want to find out about scheduling a session with me, one-on-one reading, please visit evidenceofeternity.com. Well, we got a little bit more time. So um, Jamin, what is your advice to people who want to stay in a good sense of balance, a good state of health?
Listen to your body. And what I mean by that is, so much illness, I think, comes about by ignoring the messages that your body tells you. The causes of disease are different in this day and age, in the sense we live in a much more fast pace. We're not in an agricultural kind of society anymore. We're living in like cubicles of buildings and sitting at a computer all day and having really high stress deadlines, and doesn't take into account all of the processed foods that we're eating. There's just so many factors that are coming into our health that never were issues before. So that's part of the contemporary approach of this medicine, is trying to understand it in relation to the new kinds of illness, and how to use the old ways to treat new things. But if we listen to our body, if we rest when we're tired, if we eat when we're hungry, and drink when we're thirsty, that alone can really make a big difference in our health. And you'll be surprised at how few people even recognize those messages anymore.
Well, it seems like sleep is something that we are deprived of, particularly in the US. And if we need to schedule something out of our schedule, it seems to be sleep. It's always like, well, I'm working later hours, and and then people are on their cell phones and all that. And I always try to. This is something that I do. An hour before bed, no cell phone, no computer, and I'm trying to make that 2 hours now. But it's hard because it seems like all these electronic distractions, it keeps our brain stimulated, and then when you're laying there in bed, you can't just shut your thought processes off. What is as a physician, what's your recommendation? How much do you think people need to sleep?
Um, I mean, really, that also is different from person to person. But if you're not feeling rested when you get up in the morning and you don't have enough energy to kind of get you through, there's a good indication you might need more sleep. And it's not always how much sleep you get, it's the quality of sleep you get as well. Nowadays, you have so many people with the Fitbits on, and it tells them all about how they slept the night before, kind of thing. And I've actually, this is kind of an interesting story. I made an herb formula for a patient who was actually, she's been taking it for a while. She was on Ambien for 15 plus years, I think. And that's a really hard one. It's really hard on your nervous system, and you get really dependent on it. And she's been off of it now, probably for, I think, about 3 months now, which, I kind of did a variation of this herb formula for another patient who uses a Fitbit. And the first time that she started taking it, she told me the first couple nights, it was the best sleep she's had, according to her Fitbit.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I think we're coming down to about a minute before we have to go. If people want to find out about Jamin Nichols, certified acupuncture physician, world renowned, please visit the website aquariandreams.com. And I'm Mark Anthony, and you're listening to The Psychic and the Doc. I'm going to be back next week with my co-host, Dr. Pat Basili. And next week's show, we will be taking calls from listeners. I'll be doing readings, and Dr. Pat will be giving you her street smart insights. She's a world-renowned behavioral psychologist. And then we got a really special show coming up on April 22nd with Grammy Award winner Jim Chemo West. Jamin, I want to thank you for your wisdom, your healing knowledge. You are truly a gift to everyone who is privileged to know you. I'm Mark Anthony, and you've been listening to The Psychic and the Doc. Everyone, be well, be healthy. God bless. Namaste. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning into The Psychic and the Doc with Mark Anthony and me, Dr. Pat Basili, right here on TransformationTalkRadio.com. Hey, look, come back next week so we can explore with you more of life's many challenges and learn from fascinating guests. And you know what? Even Mark and me. We'll connect you and discover insights from people in this life and from the afterlife. Extraordinary problems? Yeah, they do. They require extraordinary solutions. But step into the world of possibilities with us on The Psychic and the Doc. That's every Thursday, 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, right here on TransformationTalkRadio.com. That's TransformationTalkRadio.com. And don't forget, we're also live face-to-face on Facebook.com, Transformation Talk Radio.